Algebra 2, this is Chapter 4, Section 4. I'm now doing rotations, and this is the fifth and final video in this series on transformations. So let's look at our blue one here, our 90 degrees, and remember that rotations are always counterclockwise, so we are coming back here, and we are going around the origin, always around the origin and always counterclockwise. It's just the two assumptions we make when we talk about rotations. So let's look at this. If we were going to be at this point right here, and I'm just going to draw a line to the origin, and I want to rotate it 90 degrees. So if I was in quadrant 1 and I go 90 degrees, I'm going to end up in quadrant 2. And if I am starting at the point 2, 3, I'm going to end up at this point 3, 2. And am I right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And if I draw that in there, you can see that that is, in fact, very legitimately a 90-degree angle. So that new point is it's going to be negative 3 and positive 2. Let's look at another point. Let's grab this one here. And I'm going to clean it up a little bit so we can see this, clear all this off of here. And put that one point back on. So it was at negative 3, 2. So now we're going to move this one. And if it was here and it went 90 degrees, that one's very easy to see. It goes to right there. This is your 90-degree angle right here, right? So if it was the point 1, 0, it's now the point 0, 1. Okay, let's grab another point. This one over here, and again, we're in quadrant 1, so we're going to end up in quadrant 2. If we're on the x-axis, we end up on the y-axis. So this is the point, and this was 5, 2. And so now when we go back, and if you look at it, here is your one line, and I can draw that in here. Your new line would put you up here. So this is going to be the negative 2, 5. And you can see that that's 90 degrees here. So that's going to be negative 2, 5. We can just start looking at these. If I was at 5, 2, I end up at negative 2, 5. What is in fact is happening to my points? Well, if it was an x and a y, its new point, well, the 2 and the 5 switch places, right? So I'm going to have the y and the x. And then the 5 stays positive, but the 2 goes to negative. So the 2 is my y, and the y is changing signs on me. So I'm going from positive x to positive x, and from a positive y to the opposite of whatever y is. And I could do my last point down here. I am in quadrant 4, which means I'm going to end up in quadrant 3. And I should probably clean this up again. So let's get rid of some of this. And put that point where it belongs. So I am at, this is the point 4, negative 1. So I'm going to be at 1, 4 right here. And there is my new square, and I'm rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise around the origin. So then we can look at rotating it 180 degrees around the origin. So that means if I'm in quadrant 1, I'm going to end up in quadrant 3. I'm going to end up down here. So I've got to move 2 quadrants to go 180 degrees. So if this point right here would go from the x-axis to the y-axis back to the x-axis, and so now its new coordinate is negative 1, 2. This point went from 4, negative 1 to 1, 4, and now it's going to be down here at negative 4, negative 1. Oh, positive 1. It's positive 1. Negative 4, positive 1. So you can see that I've just gone, I never wrote that one in. This is going to be 1, 4. So if I change my signs again, so I flip them and then change the sign on my y, right? And I'm going to look at these straight across. So if I was at my original point of 4, 1. My new point is negative 4. Oops, that was 4, negative 1. My new point is negative 4, positive 1. So whenever I go 180 degrees, my x and my y stay x and y, but they are both changing signs on me. Right, so my positive 4 went to a negative 4, my negative 1 went to a positive 1. And then we can look at 270 degrees. So 270 degrees would take me from this first quadrant. Here's 90, here's 180. 270 is going to take me all the way back to here, which is the same thing as going 90 degrees in the other direction, by the way, if you haven't figured that out. So let's look at this point 4, negative 1. If I go all the way around to 1, 4, 4, negative 4, 1, it's going to be at negative 1, 4. New point, negative 1, negative 4, right? Went from quadrant 4 back to quadrant 3. This point right here, which is 1, 0, goes to 0, 1, goes to negative 1, 0, goes to 0, negative 1. Right, I'm going to move that one. And I think that's enough for you to actually see what's going on here. So if I was at the point 4, negative 1, my new point is going to be negative 1, negative 4. So if I'm at x, y, my result would be, well, they're changing places again. So I'm going to have my y and then my x. But in this case, the y stayed the same, and the x is the one that changed signs on me. Okay, so whenever I rotate 90 degrees, my y is changing signs and they're flipping positions. When I go 180, they're staying in the same position, but they both change signs. When I go 270, they're flipping signs again, but this time the x is changing signs on me. So then we're ready to look at this from the Algebra 2 standpoint with matrices. Looking at this from a matrix standpoint, let's put this into a matrix. So we've got, I'll do it the same way I did the last one. I'm just going to do 1 point. So let's grab that point 5, 2 again. Okay, so the point 5, 2, what am I going to have to multiply it by in order to rotate it? And 5, 2 became negative 2 and 5, right? Right up here, negative 2 and 5. 5, 2 became negative 2 and 5. So in order to get there, I'm going to have to get the 2 to be on the top. So I want the 2 to be on top. I want to get rid of the 5. So multiplying 5 times 0 makes it go away. 2 times the 1, but then I want the 2 to become the opposite sign. That's going to move that 2 to the top and make it negative. And then the 5, I want the 5 to stay positive, but I want it to be on the bottom. So that means I'm going to be multiplying a 1 times my 5 down here, and then a 0 times my 2. So this is the matrix, your transformation matrix, that would rotate yourself 90 degrees counterclockwise around the origin. So let's look at the 180 degrees. So here is my original point. My original point, this one I used, 4, negative 1 for my original point. And I want to end up with, when I rotate it 180 degrees, it came back to negative 4, positive 1. So what am I going to multiply it by to make that happen? Well, the 4 is going to stay on top, so the 4 is going to stay on top, and I don't want to add anything to it. But it went from a positive 4 to a negative 4, so that's going to be a negative 1. And then I want the 1 to stay on bottom, so I want to multiply the 4 times the 0 and the 1 times the 1. And then 1 went from a negative to a positive, so that's also going to have to be negative. So here is my result, my matrix that I would multiply by to rotate 180 degrees around the origin. And then let's look at the green one. The green one, I also used the point 4, negative 1. So let's grab 4, negative 1. And its new point, when I go 270 degrees, is negative 1, negative 4. So what am I going to have to multiply by that matrix to get this result matrix on the end? Well, the 4 is going to go to the bottom, right, and the 1 is going to come to the top. So I'm going to have to multiply the top here by a 0 and the 1 by a 1. And the negative 1 stayed negative 1, so multiplying by 1 will do that. And then the bottom, I want the 4 to stay, so 4 times 1. But it's got to go to a negative 4, so it's going to be a negative 1 here. And I don't want to add or subtract anything, so I'm multiplying by a 0. So here is the matrix that would multiply by 270 degrees to get my point around the origin. So here's some nice meat notes for you. And this is a rotation. Let me see if I can move them up so that they look nicer. Probably not going to be able to here. Let's see. Oh, that almost moved okay. Okay, so there's all three of the matrices that you would multiply by to do your rotations, your 90 degree, 180, and 270 degree rotations. Just jot those down and make sure you have them in your notes.